So hello, welcome back, everyone, or welcome back to us, I guess. I know we haven't had one of these in a while, so I hope you make the most and enjoy this call today. Now, as most of you should know, usually when we do these calls, the aim is to have you, the audience, come up on stage and speak to Spartacus Rex directly or ask your questions. I know some people wish to not do that, so if you want to drop your questions in the chat, then I will raise them with Spartacus later on. In the meantime, I think the subject of discussion today is knots and core debate, right? And a little bit of minimal
It's
stuff.
going to be a dev chat, actually. We're going to talk dev stuff. There's
It's gonna-
obviously many things, what's the state of play? We're going to have a chat about that. But I'm really going to... Is Joe here? I don't see him. But we're going to have a little devy stuff as well. Not long, but there is going to be some code up on screen that is going to be...
That's fine.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll hide my camera and let you do your thing. Buddy.
Right. Okay,
Cool.
right. Well, let's get started then. So I'm sorry we haven't had one of these. I disappeared, summer holidays, children, those of you that know what it's like. And, you got to spend time with them while you can before they don't want to spend time with daddy anymore. And they're like, no, you're too uncool. I don't want to see you. So that's where I went. It was interesting, actually, because when I go, I always wonder, will everything stop? Will things proceed? And actually, things do tick over here at Minima Global. I do wish there was, more external things. Like, I'm not the only one that could do this. Other people could do this sort of, chat about Minima stuff. But anyway, that's why there hasn't been one. So I'm back now, and let's try to do these, bi-weekly, or maybe even weekly, and dev stuff. I've got a few dev questions that have been asked. So I thought we'd have a little chat first before I go into the code. Let's just start with something easy. We'll just talk about the state of play at the moment. And there's clearly something going on in crypto at the moment. And I'm sure, as I think, although when I asked the rest of the Minima team whether they knew what I was talking about, nobody did. But clearly the big topic at the moment is core versus knots, which is a very interesting topic because it touches on a lot of things to do with blockchain, and it touches a lot of different parts. And for those of you that don't know what's happening, the default implementation for Bitcoin is Bitcoin Core, and frankly, 99% of users use Bitcoin Core. And in the latest update, and there's a few other implementations, but not a lot of people use them. And in the V30 update, that they're about to push, they've done something. And what they've done is that they have removed a limit on the amount of data you can put after an OP return function. So in a Bitcoin script, when you do your stuff, at the end of it, it goes OP return. And after OP return, nothing else can happen because you've left the script. This is the same as in Minima script. When you say return true or return false, either the script has said yes or it said no, but anything after that doesn't do anything. And there has been a limit on, and you can put data, like you can put a hash after OP return, or you can put a little string of characters and say, hello, my name is Spartacus, after the OP return. And that's a way of embedding data on the chain. Now, this clearly they didn't want lots of people to put lots of data on their chain, and so they had a little 80-byte limit. But they've removed it. They've removed that limit. And I think the thing that is contentious is not the fact that they have changed the default value to 100. They've said, look, you can put 100K now after OP return. For me, I think the fact that's really sort of caused the uproar is that they removed the parameter that you could set to override it. So they've actually said, look, we're not even going to let you put that back to what it was. You're going to let people embed data after OP return. Whew! Total and utter, poo storm. Yeah, it's been an absolute fight fest on the crypto sphere. If any of you have seen how that's gone. There's a reason they've done that, and I think this is the point that is lost in all the gummer. And so the truth is that clearly people have been able to embed data on the Bitcoin blockchain. Ordinals, BRC20s, all these monkey JPEG things that have been going on, that happened when we had the limit. Yeah. So you can embed data on the chain with or without this filter policy. And so what this means, this is not a consensus change. This doesn't mean the transaction is invalid. This is a mempool, a relay policy phase change, which basically means that if you do a transaction and what used to say is if you do a transaction and you put loads of data after OP return, I'm not going to add it to my mempool. I'm not going to put it in a block that I'm working on. I'm just going to ignore that. But if it gets in a block, I will consider it a valid transaction because it is a valid transaction. Yeah, you still pay per byte. You still have to pay for the size of your transaction. If you stuck JPEGs into it, then that's fine. So if it's in a block, it's valid. But I'm not going to add it to blocks, and I'm going to take it out of my mempool. This was the point. But even with that policy, clearly people have got around it. Yeah, people always manage to embed data into your blockchain. And I'm not looking at anyone in particular here. Yeah, they can always do this with or without filters. Now, you may or may not know that Bitcoin has two sort of bits of data. It's got its main 1 megabyte block, and then it's got its 3 megabyte SegWit, segregated witness block. And because the limit was put on the OP return, and because the OP return is in the main 1 megabyte block, they've started to embed this data using something called SegWit envelopes, taproot envelopes, whatever you want to call it. And that means the data gets put into the 3 megabyte block. And the segregated witness is meant for witness data. And witness data is the signatures, but the public keys. That's where the witness data goes. That's where where the signing goes and all that stuff. And they have to sort of muck about with the data. It's not a clean, I can just embed a JPEG. I have to basically pretend that it's a signature, or I have to pretend that it's a public key. Yeah. So I envelope the data and I put it into segregated witness. Now, why does this matter? This matters because when you put the data after OP return, I can prune it. Yeah. In my Bitcoin block, in my Bitcoin archive, I can look at all the transactions. If anything is after OP return, I get rid of it. It doesn't matter because I know it doesn't count for anything. Whereas when you put this data in the SegWit bar, when you put this in the segregated witness stuff, I can't prune that because that might be required. Like, it's difficult for me to tell whether that is actually required for the script to pass its witness checks. And so I can't prune it. And so what's happened is that all the data is going into the SegWit block and none of it is going on OP return, which means that I can't prune any of it. And so Core said, look, let them use OP return and then at least we can trim it. We can get rid of it. Ooh. I mean, it seems pretty obvious what you should do here. It's like, look, if they're going to do it anyway, you may as well let them do it, in the OP return bit, which I can prune. It's more expensive. You have to pay 4 times more to put data in the first block, which I don't like. Don't ask why. It's a segregated witness thing. Than if they're just going to stuff it into the segregated witness. But the argument has been, look, you should do everything in your power to stop JPEGs getting in. And by you admitting, yeah, you're going to do it anyway, so I may as well let you put it into OP return, that's really bad. Yeah, it's like you don't just say, hey, I'm actually going to allow you to do this now. You should be fighting it. You should be filtering out those transactions, and you shouldn't allow them to go into the mempool and hopefully not get into any blocks. And hopefully not get into any blocks. It's the problem, though, because it's like, but they obviously do get into blocks. Because even though you're not going to reload those transactions across the network, what happens is that I just send the transaction directly to the miner and I pay a nice fat juicy fee and they embed it. And so it doesn't matter whether you choose to relay it or not, because I can still send it to the miner. And the only thing that incentivizes a Bitcoin miner is how much are you paying me? So this is the thing, and it has really annoyed the community. And I do think Core played this badly, devs, techies, nerds, they can be pretty insensitive about these things. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. They can be quite 0-1 about it, quite Boolean, and they basically said, no, shut up. If you don't like it, you can run on a different version. And guess what? They've gone and chosen a different version, which is called NOTS, which is Luke Dash Jr.'s version of Bitcoin. And he is, evangelical about this is wrong and we shouldn't allow it. So the more of us that embed this, then the better it'll be. And I would be with Luke if it worked. But because it doesn't work, I'm not quite sure what he's trying to say. You're just switching to this system where we know that they're just now going to embed the data into the segregated witness thing. So it's like worse. And I guess so that's what's happening. That's what's kicked off. And NOTS is now at 20%. 20% from nothing, from a nothing implementation to 20%. And what are the ramifications of this? Well, I mean, the first one is that's really good. Yeah, you want lots of implementations. Yeah, this is something that we have singularly failed to do here at Minima. We have the Minima Global, Minima implementation. We have no other implementations. And you want lots of implementations. You want lots of email clients, email servers. You don't want one email client or one email server. You all speak email. Yeah, you all speak POP3 or IMAP or whatever it is. And I want lots of different implementations. It's so much more secure because if one goes down, if there's a problem with one, if one has this NPM package bug that's going around, then it doesn't affect all of them. It only affects, the ones that are affected by it. So it's actually a far more decentralization. It's a far more resilient system. You want lots of implementations. And so that's really, really good, I think, actually. And it's almost like this had to happen. Core was always exalted, revered, frankly, as this unstoppable uber set of techies. They're good. They're good. These are the cream of the cream, the top. Yeah. And now that sheen has been taken off. And so we're using two implementations. All right, that's fine. Whether or not this is going to actually make any difference to how much data gets on chain, I don't think so. Yeah, I just don't think it's possible because otherwise it would have happened before. So whatever they've done now, it's better, but they did it before anyway when it was worse. So it doesn't actually make a difference. And I guess the real question that it makes you ask, which is the important bit, I think, is what's this blockchain for? What am I allowed to use it for? Am I allowed to put JPEGs into the blockchain? And everyone's getting annoyed that I'm doing it. And are you going to try and stop my transactions, even though they're valid transactions? And I think that's a more difficult question to answer. Yeah, clearly, money should be used for money. Yeah. And when you embed all this extra data that isn't a money, it's not a transaction that's sending, it's like raw data for a JPEG that I'm storing on this blockchain. That's not money. And you're forcing everybody to store that data on their nodes. The amount of nodes that run, they all have to store this stuff. It's like we're talking giga quads of data have had to be stored when you send one of these JPEGs onto the chain. So is a blockchain, who decides what you can use a blockchain for? Yeah, what is it for? What am I allowed to do with it? And the truth is that my opinion on this is that if your chain allows you to do it, then you're allowed to do it. Yeah, that's the bottom line. It's not for you to tell people how to use your tech. It's for you to write the tech, to give it, for decentralized applications. For centralized applications, it'd be easy to fix. Yeah, that's no problem. But for decentralized applications, once you've got the code that does what it does, do what you're going to do with it. Whatever you want to do. This is why children use cardboard boxes as spaceships. Was a cardboard box meant to be used as a spaceship? No, it's meant to be used for put stuff in and for carrying and for moving stuff around. And it's really not a very good spaceship. It'll burn up on re-entry. It's like it's not going to work, but that's what they want to use it for. So you got to let them use it for that. Yeah, you don't get to tell them not to do that. So, frankly, if you can do it, you're allowed to do it. And out of all of this, all I'm going to say is that it's good that there's now multiple implementations. It's good that happens. I will say on another point that with regards to Minima, where you only store the transactions that matter to you, this isn't such a problem. Now, yes, this data does make it into the mega MMRs. This data, unless you've got mega prune on, and there are ways that you can prune your mega MMR, et cetera, et cetera. But for you running a node on Minima, this was one of the things that this is one of the things that the MMR, our way of storing data, where each of you looks after your coins and you don't look after all the coins. This is really where it shines. Because it doesn't matter how many people are sending each other JPEGs, because I don't care, because I don't store any of them anyway. Yeah, they're not my coins. Now, when you send them, fine, it's a temporary hit. You have to put that data into the transaction, and I have to store it for a day as I'm checking all of the transactions. But otherwise, I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. You can put what you want on the chain. So Minima sort of sidesteps this issue, which I think is really nice. Yeah. So I don't think we're going to have this kind of battle. But again, another thing that I think is important about this is that you've got core, which is like 1,000 strong people have committed, had pull requests committed to the Bitcoin core repo. You've got 50 eyes when you do a pull request looking at the code to check whether it's working. You've got this massive, good devs looking at this stuff. And then you've got Knots, which is Luke Dash Jr., one dev. And I know all about this because, frankly, the Minima code base, if anybody's had a look at the GitHub, is one dev. Yeah, that's me who does all that. And that's really bad. Yeah, I mean, not really bad, but because there are advantages to there being one dev and there are disadvantages to being one dev. Clearly, as one dev, you can do whatever you want. There's no committees, the amount of code, the amount that you can do, the changes you can make are infinitely faster. This is why large organizations can't move quickly. Yeah, the smaller your organization, the faster you can move, the more you can get, push to master. Woo! Push to master. Yeah, that takes 6 months when I've worked in organizations, pushing to master took 6 months. First you push to dev, then production dev, then test dev, and then after a few months of that, fine. Now we're finally on master. Whereas one dev, push to master, man. Who cares? Let's do it. So good for that. Bad for put a gun to my head. I can do whatever. I put a gun to Luke Dash Jr.'s head. Although I think you have to be careful there because Luke's a bit of a woo. But that's not good. As a security issue, having that point of failure is not what you want. And I think about this a lot with regards to Minima and how we're going to get out, how I can be extricated as the lead dev for the Minima code base. And my solution to it is actually going to be the C implementation. I can tell that's what needs to happen here. So we've got this Minima global implementation, and it's, we're also, very lucky because of the planning that is done that Minima, the protocol is finished. And when you've got multiple implementations of a finished protocol, that's one thing. That's like great. We all know how POP3 works. We can all write the email clients. We don't have to worry about it changing. But when you have multiple implementations of a protocol that is still in flux, that still might change, where different groups of people have to now agree on consensus level changes, that's really hard. This is why Ethereum is it's so hard for anybody to compete with the main Geth implementation of Ethereum because they change every 6 months. And to get different implementations, to upgrade all of the implementations with the new stuff that they're doing is so much harder because everybody needs to understand everything. And even I have difficulty understanding some of this ZK sync stuff. Yeah, it's like, oh, God. And if you don't, and you can't implement it, then you get left behind. Then you can't do it. And what about the users that are using it? This is why everybody always goes for the main implementation. Whereas on Minima, where the protocol is finished, having multiple implementations won't be a problem because the protocol is finished. And we're never going to be doing any consensus breaking stuff. And frankly, if you don't want to add so the changes are client side, the changes are optimizations, the changes are maybe how the peer-to-peer messaging is done. Maybe I'll gzip it if I know that you can unzip it at your end, or I'll do something like that. But I'm not. Your blocks will always be valid to me, and my blocks will always be valid to you. And no one is ever talking about changing the way the block validity is done. So I want multiple implementers and multiple implementations. And, we have failed to do this. And maybe this is the only way that it could happen. Maybe this fight, maybe this utter, this is the only way that you take down, when you've got a king, you've got to go for him and you've got to knock him down. And this is what's happened. Core has been taken down a peg, like a large peg. And I don't think they'll ever get back up to where they were now, because there's been too much distrust now. They're too annoyed. There's too much things going on. But it's happened. And, they've now got multiple implementations, one which is basically one guy, and one which is all I wouldn't run core. Yeah, I run core because, again, do you know more than them? You honestly think that you've thought about this more than them? I'm not saying you haven't. It's possible. There are definitely smart people out there who break this stuff down and go, no, they're wrong, I'm right. That's fine. That can happen. But in general, no. Core know more about this than anybody. And if they say we need to let them do it in OP return because it's going to be less resources and it's going to be less of a nightmare if we just let them do it here because otherwise they're going to do it here, I would listen to them because I think, they know what they're doing. And if it's a choice between one dev or 1,000, I'm going to go for the 1,000. Yeah, it's true that the one dev is much better for exploratory sort of programming, for proof of concepts, for minimum viable products and all of that. That's totally fine. That's where we shine. Yeah, you can give me a weekend and I can basically write anything. It's like spaghetti, codey, blah, 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 blah. That's great. And as soon as you got a team, that'll take you 3 months to do what one dev can do in a weekend. But then when he's not here, like I haven't been here for a couple of months, as I said at the beginning, nothing gets done because there's no one here to take the slack. So it's there's pros and cons to both sides of this, but it's just fascinating to see this play out. And I think there's some good stuff and some bad stuff. So are you here to tell me this? I've got other stuff.
No. I mean, I just wanted to comment. I was going to say, you're not exactly selling yourself by saying that you'd rather pick the 1,000 devs versus the one dev.
Yeah, obviously.
It's just funny. But we do have questions. I don't know if you want me to list them out.
Go for it. Go.
It's sort of a mix and match. Yeah. No specific topic. The first one's about Maxima contacts value. Sorry. So what are its purposes and constraints? Apparently, the Minimadocs state currently a node can support between 10 and 20 contacts, which seems unusual given it's 15 times less than Dunbar's number. So the first question is, why is that? The second question is that it says currently. So is there a plan on enhancing it or improving it? That number, I mean?
Yeah, if only I had another dev. If only there was 1,000 strong team here where I could say, hey guys, why don't you do some of the work rather than having the one dev doing everything? Yeah. So it's almost like you reach a limit as one dev as to what you can do. And I reached that limit about a year ago. And now I have to pick and choose out of the 10 things on my input. Each one is big, and it's like, I got to pick one because I can't do 10 of them. So max contacts, the reason you can only have 10 to 20, I think you can have 20 actually. I think you can have 20 max contacts is because of the way Maxima works. So Maxima was written to be convenient and to be secure. Yeah, it wasn't written to be fast, and it wasn't written to be 1,000 users. You could write a system like Maxima that did that, but when I originally started to write Maxima, I said, look, I want to send messages over the minimum network. I want to, peer-to-peer. The thing that mattered is that it must just work. I don't want to have to set anything up. If I'm on the minimum network, then Maxima needs to operate. And the way that Maxima does that is by routing messages through the nodes that I'm connected to. And you may have noticed that when I want to make a connection, what you're basically saying is, look, this is who I'm connected to these peers currently. And so when I say to you, here's my Maxima address, you may have noticed it's a public key at some IP. And there's like 5 or 6 that you can have. If you keep pressing it, you'll get a different one from all the different peers you're connected to. And then we send each other a message, and that's cool. And so if he wants to send me a message, he knows he can get to me via that route. But because our peer-to-peer network is in a constant state of flux as people join the network and leave the network, and I'm constantly connecting and disconnecting to different peers, that address is no longer valid. So every 10 minutes, I send everybody that I'm a contact to my new address. And I say, hey, 20 minutes later, I'm like, hey, I've now moved. I'm not where I used to be. I'm somewhere else. And they do the same to me. That's what being a Maxima contact means. It means that we constantly update each other when my position in the network shifts. And that requires a Maxima message. So if I've got 20 contacts, that means I have to send 20 messages. Each message requires you to do the work. Yeah, because the point about Maxima is that I need to incentivize the people that I send the message to forward it to you. They're not going to do it for free. I don't expect them to do it for free. But if I say, hey, I'll protect your coins, I'll do some work mining the Minima chain, and I can show you that as a proof of work with a block header, and I can say, look, I've just tried to find a block, and here's the block header, and you're like, yeah, this is where my coins are safe, so I'm going to forward this. So I want you to do, I'm up for you, frankly, doing as much of that as you want, because actually forwarding the message costs me almost nothing. Yeah, but I'm still not going to do it for nothing. And you doing the work costs you. So now you're going to have to do 20 pieces of work, 20 grinds. Each piece of work takes 2 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds, which means that you're going to have to be grinding for a minute. to update all your contacts. So if I had like 200 contacts, your phone would just be grinding constantly, sending messages to everybody, and then the 20 minutes would be up, and then I'd send everybody a message again. And before you ask, why do you do it every 20 minutes? Why don't you do it every 3 hours? It's because of the technicalities of if my connection goes down and I reconnect and you don't know that I've reconnected, so I always do one every 20 minutes. So that's why there's a limit, because I have to send you a message. I have to send all of my Maxima contacts one message every 20 minutes, and that costs energy. It would totally be possible to come up with a new system, a Maxima V2. This is not a minimum consensus change. This has got nothing to, you've just got this peer-to-peer network, and frankly, the Maxima, the users say, look, I'll forward your message as long as you do some work. Are there different ways that you could do this? Yeah. Have I thought of them? Yeah. Can I rewrite Maxima from scratch now? Yeah, when I've done the other 10 things on my list. So somebody else could come up with Maxima V2. There's no reason why you couldn't come up with a bigger version. But that's why there's the limit at the moment, because you have to send the messages. And so, I can't have you sending too many messages.
Sorry, Patty. There was a final question with that block. So it was mainly, is there any workaround for builders seeking to learn on the primitive mini dApps? So essentially, they're trying to, consider building an on-chain CRM. Is there a way of going around that? The Maxima constraints, basically.
So sorry. So you could find. So I wouldn't use that. I would use DHT or DHL, whatever it's called. I would use one of those online peer-to-peer things for Maxima addresses. If that's what you're trying to do, I wouldn't spend a transaction to get into a block to put my Maxima address, because that changes all the time. You have to send a transaction the whole lot. We just completely and utterly flood the chain. And in fact, sorry, this is interesting because it refers back to the core knots thing. This image stuff, it'll be priced out eventually. The bottom line is that I have no doubt that eventually enough people will be sending transactions that to send, because when you send a JPEG, you're sending a lot more data than a transaction. A transaction is like, 300 bytes. Whereas when you're sending a JPEG, it's like, 100K? Yeah, it's going to cost you 50 times more. It's a very inefficient way of, storing a JPEG rather than a hash to an IPFS address, or, each user could store the image and the hash is the only bit that actually gets on chain. That's what's going to have to happen, because it's just going to become far too expensive. So you don't need to worry about this, because it's going to be priced out, because there's going to be, this is the use case that this is for. So eventually, and which relates to the CRM thing, which is like, there's no way that you could do it now because we don't have enough traffic, but eventually when the blocks are full, you won't be able to do it because it'll cost you far too much. You can't be paying £20 a day just to tell people your Maxima address, when you could be doing it basically for free by uploading it to an IPFS address or something, or putting it on the forums, or blah, 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 blah. So I don't think doing a Maxima registry on chain is a scalable solution. Whether you could do it technically, but there's no way that would work at scale. And I've had many discussions with people about whether you should worry about that initially. Good old Will, and he was always up for just putting everything on chain. I was like, no, that'll never work. But actually, when you're small, maybe you should do it, and eventually you'll just be priced out, and then you'll come up with a new system for doing it. But yeah, that's why I'd say I wouldn't do it, because it's not scalable. So if it works, the only thing you got to worry about is that it works. Because if everybody starts using it, then it'll just become far too expensive, and you won't be able to do it because you'll have to burn modes at minimum to keep posting data on chain.
You could use Omnia, couldn't you?
No, Omnia is not for that. Omnia isn't for sharing with it. Omnia is peer-to-peer. Omnia is just me to you. You could use Omnia to send messages. Yeah, you could definitely do that. And you could, because obviously if I can send someone a minima over Omnia peer-to-peer instantly, which doesn't go on chain, I could send a message along with that one. I'd have to send some money. For people to forward the transactions over Omnia. But if you also embedded a message into that would also make it, along the trail to get to the other person. So for sending messages, I think Omnia is the eventual, king. I think they did this. They did Lightning Chat or something on Bitcoin, where you could chat over the Lightning Network. But that costs. That might cost you. What if it costs you 2p, 1p, 5p a message? You send 1,000 messages. It's talking £10 a day. You prepared to do that? Basically you get priced out and you're suddenly like, I'll just use WhatsApp or I'll just use Signal. I'm not talking about anything dodge, so I might as well just use a normal app because it's just too expensive. So again, you eventually get priced out of these systems. So they got to be worth it. What you're using your chain for has to be worth what you're doing on it because you pay for it. It's always, always have to pay for stuff.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Sorry, this is totally different, but and back to the basics. Are there any known attack vectors that could realistically threaten Minima? I think this is relevant to the NPM package thing.
Not the NPM package. I mean, well, I take that back. The NPM package could be an attack vector that works on the mini-DApp system. So NPM, if you're a React developer or if you're a developer that uses those packages, then clearly you have to be careful. I suppose, interestingly, if it may only be in the latest version and not the previous version. And so I suppose this goes to what I was saying about how are you going to validate the veracity of a chunk of code? How do you know there hasn't been something put into the code base that only a dev, would know? And this is really difficult because even when you're using non-custodial applications, they say, look, we're non-custodial. Yeah, this is an application. We don't store your private keys and you do everything. That's fine. You're still having to trust that the code actually does that. And that in the background, it's not like just sending your private key to them, because it wants to. And currently, there's not really a solution to this. Yeah, currently, you're going to have to, how do you know that the Minima application doesn't have anything funny that I've put into it? You do because you trust me, which is bad. You shouldn't trust me, which is why I was saying you want 50 people looking through the code like core on every pull request. This is why big companies wait 6 months before you push to master, because it goes through all the checks and balances and dots the I's and cross the T's of everything. And it's simply not something that 99% of people can do. How do you know this Bitcoin implementation is correct? It's not dodgy. I would say the one thing you can do, which is what I do, is that you never sign anything on an online machine. Yeah, what's your mitigation strategy? How do I make sure they don't pinch my money? Don't sign anything unless it's on an offline machine. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that you can do. The simplest, even though it's quite complicated, the simplest thing you can do is always have another machine that doesn't have Wi-Fi, that have to transfer everything over to it. So even if it's infected with 1,000 viruses, it doesn't matter because it can never, ever communicate with anybody online. That's probably the biggest thing you can do. And it's not just a question of signing whatever the application gives you, because I think actually looking into this NPM thing, what it does is it changes the addresses that you're sending to, but it displays you the old address. It displays one address, but it's actually sending to a different address. How is signing offline going to change that? Because when you sign offline, you look at it and you check the transaction. You go, yeah, this is the address that I'm sending to. Yeah, and I can look at the transaction in its raw format. And then I sign that, and then I send that on. And even when I plug it in, it goes, it says a different address. I know that I've signed to the correct address. So, the only real strategy for mitigating that is never do anything on an online machine that has got secure data. Do that offline on a different machine. That's the only thing you can do.
Doesn't Minima have JavaScript dependencies like Node.js and stuff? Doesn't that use any NPM?
JavaScript. So Minima doesn't have any of that, but the mini dApps do. And I don't use NPM packages are basically for the React developers, for the Ionic developers. Yeah, they're the ones that use the NPM. I don't use NPM. I don't use Node.js stuff. Yeah, I don't use TypeScript. Yeah, because I think it's a nightmare. And I use raw.js. I do use libs. Yeah, but I use jQuery. Basically, that's the only lib I use, and decimal.js. And I've got the same one that I used 2 years ago, so I don't even update that. And that's also important because just to say, there are people out there running Bitcoin Core 23. When you look at the runners, the people who haven't updated their Bitcoin node for 5 years, they're like, look, I don't need the new version. And that's also an incredibly good strategy. You don't need to be running the very latest version. Yeah, you just run the version that works for you. And if you don't want to upgrade to the latest version, you don't upgrade to it. And this is one of the benefits of this decentralized technology, that you're not on some website. You're not using some centralized application where when I push the update, everybody gets it. Yeah, what was that thing where what was that thing where we all got hacked? Everybody got hacked because the main... Yeah, the CrowdStrike thing last year, and it pushed on everybody's computers, and everybody was totally screwed. And it's like, right, that's what can happen when you have centralized code. But when you have decentralized code, as long as it works for you and you don't need the new features, don't upgrade. That's the way to get around this. And so with the Minidapp system, when it's updated, does it offer what you need? Do you want to risk, downloading a new application, or does the current application do what you want? Do you need to upgrade to the latest version? This is something that very few people ever think about. Frankly, they're always like, yeah, I want the latest version. Obviously, it doesn't matter what it does. It's the latest. It must be the best. But that in and of itself opens up many attack vectors. And so you have to be careful about that. And this is really, I think, the conundrum that the crypto industry has. This is just, when I say it out loud, it sounds like a nightmare. It's like, how is anybody normal, a normie who's not techie in any way, going to understand any of this? Like, what? So I can't download this version. I'm gonna have to check something. It's like, yeah, and sort of maybe some sort of trusted system. I mean, I guess, off the top of my head, you could have a local AI LLM that scans the code for you and tells you whether it thinks it sees anything dodgy. It'd be better than not having that. Yeah, you could have so that might be a way of checking code. Like, you don't understand code. Neo doesn't understand code. He's not going to be able to look through the Minidapp and see if there's anything dodgy in it. But he could probably just give it to his local LLM and say, hey, does this look fine? 99% of the time, the local LLM will spot something dodge. Yeah, and then the hackers would have to work out a way of doing it so the local LLM doesn't catch it, and then we'd have to work out a way of making the LLM smarter so they do catch it, and then that battle would ensue. And this would squeeze and wring it down to, how secure can we make it? You're not going to get 100%. You're not going to get perfect, but you could mitigate it. There are strategies that you can use, but yeah, you have to think about these things, and very few people do.
I think we have brought that up in the past, using AI to check
to sort of
dApps.
Yeah, it's at that sort of level. It could just about do that if you ask me. If you said, look, has this got a rootkit or something? Does it ever make a web call? Does it ever try to get the information out of the Minidapp to another server? And it could probably check that. But then what you do is you'd have to write code that wrote the code that did it. So you try to abstract the hack away from it. I'm not giving away anything here, but there are ways that now I'm trying to outwit the LLM. That battle proceeds. I don't think that'll ever be over, actually.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention something. I saw Rob. Rob has been typing for a while, and he's one of the people who submitted a question earlier. Rob, if you want to come up on stage and speak to Paddy directly about this Maxima contacts thing. Oh, he just submitted his message. Okay, there you go. The point is for you all to join us on stage and speak with us, not
Ooh, here we go. Someone's on stage. Who's that? Hello, Rob.
Hello, everybody. How'd you do?
Hello, mate. I'm fine. Hello, sir.
How you doing, Paddy? You all right?
I'm all right, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, not surprised. Yeah, the max contacts question was me. I'm kind of interested in, let's say, social networks or CRMs or things that are managing large numbers of people records in a decentralized way. So I think what you described is that the reason what you're really doing is like it's a peering mechanism. So from a networking perspective, there's no benefit to having 200. You just need enough chattiness to be able to contact outside, and you're incurring a grind cost for those 20 already. So making it bigger makes it more expensive. Yeah.
Basically, it becomes unwieldy. So when we didn't have the limit, Baz had like 200 contacts, and his phone, he's like, well, my phone was 100%. It's like grinding away. And I'm like, and I couldn't work it out. And then it turned out that he had 200 max contacts. And it was that. And it was just like constantly sending messages to users when he shifted on the network. And it's because, you shift automatically every 20, 30 minutes. And if I move and I told you that I was somewhere and now I'm somewhere else, I need to tell you where I am. And that means I have to update 200 people to where I am. I mean, the reason the reason I don't just stick to the same node, which you could do. Yeah, I could just say, look, once I've got a connection, I stick to that node. Is because now you can't be DOSed. Maxima is really nice like that because I switch around the network the whole time. It pros and cons. It incurs this hit, but it means that you now if I disconnect from you, you don't know where I am and you can't follow me. Unless I tell you where I am, you don't know where I am, and so you can't then start sending me messages once I've said no, I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah, so I get the whole privacy security network.
Yeah, that's what it's. Yeah, I mean, I basically thought, how many chats do you use on WhatsApp? Is where the 20 came from. It's like I got 20 chats on WhatsApp that I basically use, even though I've got 100 chats in there. There's 20.
Yeah, no. So let's call that networking. Completely understand.
Yeah.
My question is, if that's the case, that it's a networking component, is it coupled to the protocol, or because
No.
the protocol is set, right? And you implied that you could rewrite the whole of Maxima if you just had enough time.
Yeah. The only thing that Maxima does, which is protocol related, is I expect you to mine a block. I expect not mine a block, but I expect you to do one piece of work, a TX POW, and I will then forward your message. But if you don't give me the TX POW, I don't forward the message.
Okay. So with regards to like the alternative, let's say I've got I don't know a CRM with 20 million records, but it's decentralized, distributed. Where would that be? You mentioned DHT. I assume you mean distributed hash table.
Yeah.
So
that would probably be that's meant to be decentralized. That's meant to be a peer-to-peer network where you can all put basically, key pairs into a DHT, and then everybody can connect to it and sort of run it. So I think that would be a much, much more efficient way of storing the data, frankly. If you know what I mean.
So messaging between those people would definitely be Omnia. And I was just trying to work out what this Max Contacts thing was, where it sat. But that's helpful.
So my Omnia application uses Maxima to communicate with people. So when I open a channel with someone, the way I then swap contracts with them is over Maxima. So what I'm saying is I've got a channel which is basically a 2 of 2 multi-sig, and me and him, I want to send him some money from that channel. I create the transaction, I sign it, I give him the sign, he gives me this, and we both give each other the signed version, but we don't post it. And then when he wants to send me, we update that, we do a different we increment the sequence number, and then when we communicate, which is the original reason I wrote Maxima, was so that you need to communicate with the person you have a channel with, and it's like, how are people going to communicate with each other? You could do it over email, you could do it over WhatsApp if you copy and pasted chunks of code, but Maxima was the way to do that. So how I update my Omnia channel is over Maxima. Yeah, so I can only have, I can have as many channels as I want, but I can only have them with 20 users. I can have 10 channels with the same user, but I can only have 20 different users that I'm.
But it's an arbitrary choice. You just need a different architecture if you want to deal with bigger graphs, basically.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't need to send a transaction. I don't currently I do one every, but imagine you had 1,000 max contacts. Yeah, you would only need to update them if the node that you were connected to, you then disconnect. I currently, to be safe, to make it sturdy and robust, inefficiently send a message every 20 minutes, always. Whereas I don't need to do that. I could have made it that I didn't send it every 20 minutes, and that would probably be the first change. I would try to change the fact that I send a message every 20 minutes to only send a message when the network updates.
I think I fundamentally misunderstood what you were trying to build with it. I thought you were trying to build a primitive for a contact that could be reused across multiple mini-dApps. So let's say I create, this is how it works in iOS at an operating system level, right? The contacts belong to the operating system, so that when I say, share my contacts, I don't have to rewrite that in every single mini-dApp. So that's what I thought you were trying to build.
That is what it means. Look, I have these 20 contacts, and any mini-dApp can now send a message to any of those 20 contacts. Yeah, it is meant to be a primitive, and it is meant to be something that every mini-dApp has access to via the Maxima action send data and the max contacts. Those two functions, Maxima and max contacts, are just two functions, and you could write max contacts 2 and Maxima 2 if you wanted to do a different system. But all they do is they give every mini-dApp the ability to speak to any of my contacts that I have created using Maxima. But it's got nothing to do with the protocol other than the fact that I have to show a piece of work. And if you could come up with a different way of doing it, I still feel you'd have to do a piece of work because or if you did it over Omnia, you'd have to, pay a little bit of minima. You could come up with a completely different system and it would be fine. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. That's helpful.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Glad you came up on stage.
So before you ask me another question, I'll just one more little thing. I got a list. I'll talk about something. So the other thing about Core and Knots is that Luke Dash Jr. runs a mining pool, and his mining pool is called Ocean. I don't know if you know this. And the thing that does, which is different, is that normally when you join a mining pool, what happens is that the mining pool operator says, right, I'm going to build a block. I get all the transactions. I build a block. And then I send the block header to all my miners. You all grind away, and somebody finds it. somebody finds the block, and then I pay the person who found the block, and I pay everybody who's been working on it. But mining pool operator builds the block. Only one person builds the block. This is obviously not very cool, because obviously that's the censorship attack. If I get hold of the mining operator, I can tell him not to include a transaction, and all of the miners will go along with what he says. This is the block, you mine it. And what Ocean does is it says, no, each user builds their own block. And the clever bit is you get to build a block and yet still pay out so that everybody gets paid in the pool. This is what Stratum v2 does. It's quite complicated to make sure, we're trying to make this trustless. I don't want to have to trust that you're going to pay me. I don't want you to work on a block that only you get paid on. Yeah, we're all meant to be paying each other if we're working in this pool. How do you combine all this work on different blocks? Right. So that's what Luke Dash Jr.'s mining pool does. And what's interesting about that is, which I like actually, I think that helps the situation. But the truth is that the problem is that the mining pool operator is still the one that pays you. So there's still a central point of failure. There's still a there's still the centralized element that it's like everybody works on blocks that they made, but I get paid and then I pay you. So if I choose not to pay you, or more likely, if the government puts a gun to my head and says, don't pay him because he built a block with the dodgy transaction, which we didn't want from that naughty site, that's censoring you, because you're not going to keep mining for that pool. Yeah, you're not going to keep mining if nobody pays you for the blocks you've mined. So it doesn't fix the problem. Having Ocean and everybody building their own blocks is, frankly, it just pushes the problem up to the payment, which is still centralized. And so what you want is a mining pool where no one can stop anybody from getting paid, but you have decentralized payments as opposed to centralized payments. And the only mining pool that ever did this was P2Pool on Bitcoin. And that's the decentralized mining pool where everybody somehow, technically, I won't go into it, get involved, and no one can stop anybody from getting paid, and it's still everybody gets paid. Really, really cool, really good tech. And that's the tech that Minima uses. That's Minima, I like to think of as the largest P2Pool ever created in the world, because that's how we all work. Even though we don't get paid, even though you don't get money, the way that I combine all the pieces of work that all of you do to come up with one block, which is the sum of all of the work that all of you have done, uses P2Pool. That's the mechanic that we use to construct the blocks. Because if I give you two pieces of work, it's impossible mathematically for me to say, right, I've got one piece of work and another piece of work. I want a piece of work, a POW unit that is the sum of those two. You can't do that. There's no way of me then saying, okay, this is what it would be, and it is objectively a proof of work, which is the sum of those two. Except if you're using the P2Pool mechanic, except if you're doing it the way P2Pool did it, which is the way that Minima does it, which is just like, decentralization. That's how we roll. So, because economic nodes, there's a lot of chat, there's a lot of banter now about like, hey, the miners are just the stewards. Yeah, you work for us, I don't work for you. Yeah, you do what we tell you, all this stuff. Yes, and they say that if you run a Bitcoin node, but you don't mine, you're just running your node. That's really important. I agree. It's very important. And you're known as an economic node. Yeah. And you enforce the rules. And you do enforce the rules because you will not accept an invalid transaction. You will not accept a block that has a transaction that does something that is illegal. He didn't have the money, but he sent something. That's an invalid transaction. I'm not accepting it. That's what the economic nodes do. And this is what they're saying. They're saying, look, it's fine. They're just stewards. They're just the engine, but you're the steering wheel and everything, and you're making sure that no dodgy transactions are getting into the chain. This is known as a hard fork. Yeah, a hard fork is when you increase the set of valid transactions. Because, for instance, if I do a transaction with some new parameter, because it's like, no, he's actually got money that he didn't have before because we've come up with a special thing. That's a hard fork. Yeah, I've had to add something to the rule set so that you think that this transaction is valid when it wasn't valid before. And economic nodes prevent that. Fantastic. Guess what? The point of a blockchain, is obviously enforce the rules. That goes without saying. The point of a blockchain is censorship resistance. And censorship resistance is a soft fork. What I mean by that is that censorship resistant is not about enforcing rules. Censorship resistant is about adding transactions to blocks. Yeah, the only people that get involved in adding transactions to blocks are the miners. And a soft fork is when you reduce the number of valid transactions. So the miners say, this address, which is on a dodgy website, is now considered illegal. Yeah, I don't want to add those transactions because the government have told me that if I do, I go to jail. It's coercion. It's not a trust, it's coercion. And so only the miners are involved in the censorship resistance part. Only the miners are involved in adding the transactions to the blocks. And that has nothing to do with you enforcing the rules, because not including a transaction doesn't break any rules. Yeah, you're totally happy whether this block has this transaction or not. Both blocks are valid, just that one is censored and one is not. And so there's a real disconnect here where they always say, it doesn't matter, economic nodes are all that matter, and we can just have one big miner doing all the work. Wrong. One big miner doing all the work is called PayPal. Yeah, now you can make sure, now imagine PayPal did it so you could tell what everybody's balance was. So you could check that everybody who sent money to everybody on PayPal actually had the money. Fine. No one can send anybody money that they don't have on PayPal. But PayPal is the one that decides whether or not you're allowed to send money to someone, because they're the ones that build the block. And so it is not the case that the miners are just stewards. This is wrong. They're not just stewards. They are really, they're the most important aspect of it. You have to run a full node. You have to be able to tell whether or not a transaction is valid. That goes without saying. But more important, you have to be involved in the construction of the chain. You have to be there when it's like, oh, this transaction goes in the block, this one, yeah, because that's where the censorship takes place. And that's the only reason you need to use a blockchain, for censorship resistance. So, and I never see that. I never see anybody talking about this. I'm going to pick a fight. Yeah, I'm going to pick a fight on Twitter and start having this discussion with people, because they just, they conflate hard forks and soft forks, economic activity, censorship resistance. They're very different things. One of them is like, you have to do that. And one of them is like, this is the whole point of the blockchain, and you're not helping. You're not actually helping with censorship resistance when you run a non-mining node. You're just making sure that there's no dodgy transactions. And those two things are very different. And again, all of this is being churned up. It's almost good that this happens every 3 or 4 years, because it makes everybody look in the mirror. It makes everybody sort of think about what we're doing here, why we're doing it, especially now. I mean, I'm going to have a little rant now, especially now that, all these centralized blockchains are starting up. Yeah, Google are doing a chain. Tether are doing a chain. Tether are doing a USDT chain with 0 fees, which everybody's going to use. Of course they are. Why would they spend, $5 sending USDT on Ethereum when they could do it for free? Yeah, on the Tether chain. Totally centralized, totally censorable, totally chop-upable. And, it sort of really makes you think, look, do you understand what we're doing here? Do you realize what the point of using the blockchain is? Because never before, I live in the UK here, and, it's happened. Never before have our liberties been under attack as much as they are now. You can't even post a tweet in the UK with hurty words without getting arrested. This is unbelievable. This is like, what? I never would have expected this to happen in the speed at which it has happened. The gradually and suddenly, and it's happened. And we've lost that. And we've lost that freedom. And so it has never been more important than ever that blockchains perform the function that they are designed to do, which is a censorship-resistant network for, financial transactions. And this is totally forgotten, which, again, was to be expected. As the big money comes in, as Wall Street starts plowing in, as strategy and Michael Saylor starts going, you're making more money than you know what to do with. And everyone's like, I don't care about freedom. I just care about money. Yeah, this is being swept under the carpet, and people aren't realizing that, look, this is what the point of this is. We're meant to be fighting that. And actually, it's going to be interesting, because this is the crux point. We're actually going to see whether this technology does what it says on the tin, whether this tech is going to be able to withstand the incredible attack that we are now facing. It might be that, people might stop using Bitcoin. I don't think they will. I think the money aspect of it is clear as day. People realize, something's fishy, but they're going to be using all these other centralized chains They're going to be using Google's doing an L1, which runs on Python. Yeah, Google are doing a centralized chain. Can you do whatever you want on that chain? No. Does a business care? No. Are they going to use Google, or are they going to use some weird decentralized censorship resistant chain where they can't stop people doing what they want on it? Obviously, they're going to use Google. Yeah. So it's more important than ever that an understanding, you can price this in, the risk reward. You can use a centralized system. That's fine. But you need to realize it's not the same as using the censorship resistant system. And not understanding that those two systems are fundamentally different is the problem. Yeah, there's so much rhetoric and stuff, and it's like, no, this is fine. You just have to run an economic node. The miners are just stewards. Wrong. Yeah, this is how Minima rolls. This is exactly the reason that Minima was invented, because none of that matters to us. Because all of us are involved in the construction of the chain. All of us obviously run a full node, because you have to run a full node. That goes without saying. Yeah, and those who don't even run a full node, whether they're mining or not, and they're the 99% currently. They're the 99%. Until it becomes possible to put Minima on a ring, on a watch, so that you run it. That has to be the goal. You need to be running it without even knowing you're running it, and then it'll work. And then everybody is on the correct chain, on the censorship-resistant chain. But sorry, I'm going to just a little bit more. It is not the case that everything needs to be done in a censorship-resistant way, because you pay for that. There is a cost involved in that censorship resistance. It's not free. Anything that is free is clearly not censorship resistant. Anything that says we do 100,000 transactions per second, so it doesn't cost you anything to do it. It's like, well, how's that paying for my? How I've got to be giving something. There's nothing for nothing in this world. And the ability to send money to anybody or transact with anybody in a DEX or whatever is going to cost you. Now, does that mean that you should do everything in this censorship-resistant way? No. Does that mean I should be doing a CRM, and storing all my data on a blockchain? No. But some things you will have to do on the blockchain. Yeah, like money. Yeah, my money, the money I hand down to my children, my inheritance, all of those sort of things. That can and will be in a censorship-resistant way, because I don't want anybody to muck about with it. But a group of pasta recipes, does that need to be on a censorship-resistant decentralized blockchain? No, probably not. Yeah, it's not the case that we should use this for everything. And anyway, this is why the Coordinates thing is so interesting, because all of these questions are now being brought up, and hopefully people are having to have a real hard look at what it is that this tech does, what it's good for. Because it's rubbish, blockchains, for lots of things. It's not good for everything. It's it does this one thing, and it's the only thing that does it. But if you don't need it, don't use that. Yeah, there are things that need that, and there are reasons why you should use it, but not all reasons.
Thank you, Paddy.
Yep.
Got a lot off your chest there.
Yep. Sorry, it's building up.
2.5 months building up. You needed this.
Okay, I'm seeing all of this, like just the burning buildings, the train crash, slow motion. I can't believe it. Yeah. I mean, I can, but.
So we're gonna have to wrap up. It's been an hour.
Already.
And our recording man is running out of time. So.
Can I just have one more little rant then before I go? Because it's 2.5 months.
It might not be on the recording. I'm just saying.
What?
But go ahead.
Come on, we've been through this, Neo. Just keep playing. Just keep recording. And so the other thing I'll say, that just to finish this off, is that everything that I do, everything that every blockchain does, and the teams and the work and the effort and the sweat and the blood and the tears, gets distilled down to one number, whether rightly or wrongly. Wrongly, it's like they don't know the effort we've put in and the work and this and because of this and that. But the truth is that it gets distilled to one number, and that number is price. Yeah. And it really makes you think. It's almost beautiful and not beautiful. It's almost like, wow, that's such a great metric. Yeah, price. The most important metric in the universe, price. Price as a function. Price is a function of demand. Yeah. And demand is a function of how useful people think your tech is, how valuable they think your tech is. And that's a funny one, because I notice that Minima's price is not great. Yeah. And I notice that Minima's tech is amazing. Yeah. And I notice that Minima isn't affected by all this stuff that they're talking about. And I know that Minima hits that point where all they ever talk about is decentralization and centralized systems, and Minima has completely just jumped over all of that in a way that doesn't seem to have happened anywhere else, and that hasn't converted into high price, and that makes me think. That makes me think. What are we doing wrong? What are we not offering? What are we not able to get users to do? What is the use case? What do they want to do on the chain? Is it the fact that there's nothing worth doing that you're allowed to do? Yeah, if you're allowed to do it, you shouldn't use a blockchain to do it. Yeah, if you're not allowed to do it, then you should use a blockchain. So you've got to find something that everybody wants to do that they're not allowed to do, and then offer them a way of doing that on your chain. And that's why ETH's dying. Yeah, everybody's seen the numbers on Ethereum. I know everyone's like, yeah, it's going to hit 20,000. Yeah, the amount of money the miners are making on ETH is almost less than what Bitcoin makes. And it never used to be the case. Ethereum always used to make loads more than. But now that you can trade, on sexes, and now that you can send money, now that all the centralized companies have realized, you've got Revolut and you've got this, and they just send, and you can send the USDT and the crypto stuff. And now that's all that happened. You don't use, censorship resistant tech to do it. And so what is this thing? What is this? What is the zeitgeist application that will drive users to use your chain? And I'm telling you, because this is going to come from you, because for 5 years now, we've been whacking our heads against the wall, and it's not a wallet, and it's not a DEX, because we've written that, and it hasn't done anything. It's something else. There's a use case there, and money is the only one that has worked. Everything else is now being subsumed into the businesses. The London Stock Exchange will soon have its own DEX. And they'll say, look, you can send your tokens to this over EVM and you'll be able to trade and it'll be super fast and you won't have to, there will be none of this congestion and all of that. So, what's the app that you're looking for? What's the use case that you're looking for? And I'm asking you, the users, to think about this, to come up with this. Think about it.
Thank you, Patty.
All
right. Just a quick question. Do you know if we're going to have another one next week?
How about bi-weekly? I think we should do one every
we can do bi-weekly. I mean, we were very informal about the regularity, so I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I haven't done the All right, I didn't do the Maxima thing. I did. Joe wanted to know about the Maxima stuff. I may have to do a more nerdy one of these.
You can do it. I mean, the recording's not going to last longer, but you can stay on here as long as you want.
All right. Well, if anybody's interested,
I mean, I'm here.
I don't know if Joe here. Stick your hand up if you are. He's not even here actually. So, all right, maybe he was gonna. It's fine. Let's do it. I'm definitely doing it in 2 weeks. I'll do it. Let's do it. Let's wrap it up. So, you got this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Sorry if your question wasn't answered. You can always put them in dev chat and hope that Patty reads them and replies.
Just put it in my inbox. Yeah, God, we really need another dev. I really need another more devs.
Well, I hope it'll be your Christmas present.
Today's assignment is just to really think about what we're doing here. Why we're here, what it's for, what blockchains are for, what am I allowed to do with it? The really core fundamental questions. I think that's what the current story of crypto is, in my honest opinion.
Yeah. Always hard for me to moderate these calls because you inspire me as well as the audience, Patty. So
great.
It's hard for me to step in. Anyways, thank you, and I'm just gonna end the stage. So I'll see everybody around. Patty, you as well.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Thanks for listening to me. All right.
Thank you.